Thank you, Stephen, and welcome, everyone. Britain needs abundant, affordable energy, but instead we have the highest energy prices in the developed world. This is a crisis which has made us poorer, weaker, and less secure. The cause of this is three moral failures: indifference, pretense, and profligacy. First, indifference. Our rulers have become indifferent to the need for reliable, domestically generated power. In the 90s, they abandoned the planned energy system. They shrugged off what was rightly seen as a central duty of the state and hoped markets would magically do the job for them. They became indifferent to the realities of supplying reliable power and instead became distracted by fads and fancies. Which brings us to the second moral failure, which is pretense. There's been an ill-fated attempt to ignore the material world. But as we're finding out, the material world actually matters. Production matters. Tangible needs matter. Instead of doing the proper analysis, our leaders brushed away the consequences of their failure to plan. In fact, they had no plan. Even as our industrial base collapsed under huge energy costs, they never questioned the subsidies or the speed of net zero transition, which was partly causing it. You can't tax a loss, and you can't tax a closed factory. But the tax base and fundamental economics is of no concern to Miliband or Reeves, so the pretense continues. Which brings us to the final moral failure, which is profligacy. In betting the bank on unreliable, intermittent renewables, our political establishment has structured our energy system to require huge imports of natural gas. We're now importing over 40% of our energy. The question is, how do we pay for that? As the trade balance shows, it's not by exporting things, which leads to two options: selling assets or getting further into debt. That is, by selling out future generations. And there is nothing moral in leaving future generations with unsustainable debt. On the contrary, it's actually antisocial. Our elites have traded our prosperity for their own self-righteousness. And all the major parties have been complicit in this folly. They've failed in their central duty to provide abundant, affordable energy. They produced a system which is unreliable, produces too little power at too high a price, and which is too reliant on imports. As a means to impoverish the nation, this could hardly be improved upon. So, as the party of the patriotic state, the SDP is today calling time on this crisis. Our solution has no clever accounting and no bureaucratic tricks. Our remedy is straightforward. As Tawny once said, the solutions to our problems are rejected not because they're difficult, but because they're simple. Our solution is to take control of the energy system, to build a new wave of state-owned power stations and flood the grid with enough supply to establish a permanent price fix for consumers and industry. In other words, the SDP solution to the energy crisis is to use brute force, the sort of thing a competent state can do. And if brute force isn't working, we're not using enough. Thank you.
And I would like to thank William, following his sabotage, for that beautiful introduction. His focus was on the moral failures by our political class that begat our energy crisis. In this technical presentation, I will explain how these attitudes, indifference, pretense, and profligacy manifested themselves and came to cause our energy crisis. Then, I will set out a plan to resolve it. First, however, we must begin with a key point. We are living through an energy crisis. It is a multi-decade crisis, which began at its latest in 2005. 2005 is the year in which total electrical energy supplied by Britain's grid peaked. Since then, the amount of energy supplied by our grid has declined by 25.7% in aggregate. Unfortunately, demand for electricity has not fallen by the same amount. We can see this in an astronomical increase in the price of electricity since 2005. Real energy prices have risen by over 250% in real terms. This occurred in 3 phases. Firstly, a phase of rapid real price growth of 98.8% between 2004 and 2009. Secondly, a phase of relatively slow real price growth of 10.7% between 2010 and 2017. Finally, a phase of, once again, real rapid price growth of 78.2% between 2018 and 2024. Many have focused on what this cost represents to Britain in terms of the prices paid on our energy bills. However, there is an additional cost, an opportunity cost. Today, grid electricity is a universal economic input. Indeed, we consider it to be the third factor of production, alongside capital and labour. By raising the price of this input, we thus prevent economic activity from occurring in the first place. Most obviously, we can see this through the absolute decline in energy-intensive industries and a comparative disadvantage for British manufacturing. This alone is worrying, given that manufacturing tends to have the highest gross economic value add. But, along with hindering these activities, higher energy costs have deterred economic activity economy-wide. They prevented the adoption of critical labor-saving technology. They have prevented consumption in the orders not of billions, but of trillions. This can be expressed in a relationship between energy price increases and output per person, what we call productivity. For the first time, the Social Democratic Party has calculated this productivity impact from energy price hikes. Using a 2023 item of OECD research, we have made the first attempt to quantify the relationship between British energy price rises and productivity loss. The OECD found that every 5% increase in energy prices causes a 0.4% contraction in productivity in the subsequent year. Extrapolating this relationship, we have calculated that post-2004 energy price hikes have reduced Britain's productivity by 10.8%. In other words, we would be 10.8% more productive today had real energy prices not risen since 2005. This opportunity cost, the true cost of the energy crisis, can be calculated by looking at how the productivity drag has hit the economy in every year since 2004. The result, in total, a reduction of economic output by £3,070 billion. This is £146 billion on an annualised basis. In 2024 alone, this productivity drag represented £310 billion. To contextualise this is greater than a full year of Britain's gross domestic product. It is greater than our outstanding national debt. It is the cost of the energy crisis. Now that we have established this cost, we can ask ourselves, how did this come to be? It begins with the Electricity Act of 1989. This act dismantled Britain's Central Electricity Generation Board, the CEGB, and privatised our energy system. The CEGB, over the 30 years of its existence, had proven remarkably adept at constantly growing Britain's generation capacity. Between 1960 and 1990, total electricity supplied grew constantly at 3% per annum. This had been predicated on a system of forward-constructing generation capacity based on demand forecasts, typically in the order of 5 to 7 years. It built ahead of demand, benefiting from access to government bonds for cheap plant financing. The Electricity Act destroyed this system. It decoupled energy investment and decision-making from the national economic considerations with which it is necessarily entwined. We devote some time in energy abundance to exploring how the private energy system began to fail during the 1990s and 2000s. But our prime focus is the abandonment of planning. Because without the centralized planning function once afforded by the CEGB, it was possible for the state and for the energy system as a whole to ignore and disown significant costs and externalities from decisions regarding the generation mix. Here, I am referring towards the rise of renewables. Nearly 80% of post-2004 energy price hikes have come from growth in the non-wholesale component of electricity prices. It has not been expensive gas which has driven energy price growth. Even after accounting for supply shocks such as the Russo-Ukrainian war, it has been these non-wholesale costs which we see manifest in the form of policy costs and network costs or capacity market costs. What are these costs? To explain this is to explain the energy crisis. The shift en masse towards intermittent renewable generation began gearing up in the mid-2000s. Market incentives through carbon pricing began to be introduced to encourage generators to invest in renewable capacity. However, as these generation sources grew in importance to the grid, a fundamental question went unanswered. It's one that some of you may have asked yourselves too. What happens when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing? Well, in the age of the CEGB, this question would have been answered. But in the unplanned system, it was possible for generators to ignore this. For what eventually evolved into the contracts for difference system, they simply built renewable capacity and got guaranteed payment via the state. But this has been a fudge, because it does not answer the question of intermittency. Rather, to answer the question of intermittency, we must turn to scientific analysis, based on our particular latitude and historic wind patterns. In 2021, a paper in Nature Communications addressed this challenge and showed the generation and storage requirements required that would be needed to make sure wind and solar could operate at scale. It found that to meet our energy needs, a system backed by intermittent renewables would need to overbuild generation capacity by 300% and also enjoy enough storage capacity to meet 12 hours of national demand at peak load. From here, our green paper has calculated that such a generation component would cost approximately 300 billion alone. But the storage component, assuming a modest 500 million pounds per gigawatt hour, would cost 1.25 trillion pounds. That is, a system backed by intermittent renewables demands an additional infrastructure investment of 1.5 trillion pounds, with all that infrastructure having a lifespan of 20 years. There's been no such program to construct this infrastructure. This is where these non-wholesale costs come into play. Under the guise of demand management or demand flexibility, Ofgem and now NESO have deliberately shifted to seeking to suppress, quote, peak demand. But in practice, suppressing peak demand simply means suppressing demand. You're simply discouraging the use of energy at the times when people want to use it most, the times when people need to use it most. NESO is currently targeting a 54% reduction in peak demand by 2050. The main mechanism for this, policy and network costs. These are mechanisms of administering and monitoring a system of energy rationing, a means to enable the grid to operate despite electricity supply dropping in real terms by 25% since 2005. To solve this, we propose a 10-year plan that both involves ending the trend towards intermittent renewables and restores the planning function of the state in the energy system. Its first step is boosting electricity supplied per annum to the counterfactual world where energy supply had not experienced a post-2005 contraction, what we call closing the supply gap. We will achieve this through a program of what we call grid stabilization. Along with closing the supply gap of 30 gigawatts through new generation, we will also need to preempt the closure of 30 gigawatts of existing generation, such as Drax, Linemouth, and our aging nuclear fleet. In total, 60 gigawatts of generation will be required. To do this, we will rapidly construct 40 gigawatts of new gas power stations and 20 gigawatts of new coal power stations. Assuming £1 billion of capacity per gigawatt of capacity of gas and £3 billion per gigawatt of capacity of coal, we anticipate this project to cost £100 billion. Thankfully, we have a very convenient means to finance this. We will repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act. From there, we will redirect the approximately £10 billion per annum of funds that are currently earmarked for net zero investments throughout the 2030s onwards, and have a bit of change to spare. After grid stabilization, we will then move to forward build new capacity to meet the subsequent decade of demand growth. For security, we'll assume a higher than anticipated growth in demand of 4% per annum. To meet this, while also replacing renewables that are set to go offline during the period, we'll need to construct 40 gigawatts of new generation. To do so, we will build out the cheapest and most reliable form of generation there is, nuclear power. The main reason that nuclear has declined in our generation mix is because of private financing. This may sound peculiar, but in practice, the capital intensity of nuclear means that it multiplies in cost as costs of capital increase, in a way that is simply not the case for gas. Thus, by using the state to construct this 40 gigawatts of new capacity, we will be able to deliver cheap nuclear for multiples less than the abortive Sizewell C and Hinkley Point C projects. And unlike those projects, we'll also use cheap reactors designed for mass production. Unlike the EPR design of Sizewell C or Hinkley Point C, we will use either Westinghouse's AP1000 or KEPCO's APR 1400 reactor designs. Academic costings for the former believe that even before economies of scale are realized, an AP1000 will cost $3.5 million per gigawatt of capacity. For reference, Hinkley Point C is targeted to cost well over £12 million per gigawatt of capacity. Key to realizing this will be cheap financing with 30-year bond issuances. But also key will be the new body that we will create to build the 100 gigawatts of new energy capacity in our 10-year plan. Central Energy. Central Energy will have the ability to grant itself planning permission. It will be granted full immunity from judicial review. It will be led by technocratic engineers tasked solely with one job, fulfilling the political mandate of fulfilling the 10-year plan. And then, well, hold on for a moment. Because following the completion of our 10-year plan, we will move to a full rationalization and nationalization of our energy system, all under Central Energy. A key threshold applied to the organization will be whether under open conditions it can reliably provide energy at a market rate of 10 pence per kilowatt hour, because this will spark the final transition in our energy vision. Central Energy will enter a new operational phase, one where it operates alongside the Treasury and the Bank of England to provide annual demand forecasts and 5-year capital plans for generation to be financed through government bonds, all to meet a new central political objective: the maintenance of a permanent nominal energy price fix at 10 pence per kilowatt hour. In effect, we will establish an identity between energy and value, a system where the pound can be expressed as a unit of energy. We call this system the energy credit. It will change everything. Firstly, we will create an incentive structure to prevent a repeat of the post-1990 mistakes of our energy system. The value of the pound and bond yields on global markets will be tied to the government's credibility in maintaining the energy credit regime and price fix. It will require it to ensure central energy is given all tools necessary to achieve its goals. Second, along with providing a globally competitive energy price at launch, the energy credit will provide a level of continuity and stability in energy prices to encourage a new wave of investment in manufacturing and energy-intensive industries in the order of decades. And it provides a guarantee of continuously decreasing real energy prices as inflation slowly makes energy cheaper in real terms. Third, it will provide a new suite of tools of economic management. Consider in monetary policy. If the economy is entering a deflationary period, central energy can increase the money supply by simply adding credit to customer accounts and freeing up bills to be spent on consumption. If the economy is entering an inflationary period, central energy can decrease the money supply by encouraging customers to front-load energy spending by offering bonus kilowatt hours for every pound debited to their account. And critically, it will provide a source of information to manage the economy over the long run using material analysis. If the rate of inflation is such that central energy risks being overwhelmed through demand growth in its 5-year projections, then interest rates can be increased early and appropriately to ensure that the energy system integrity is maintained. This allows the nation's money and balance sheet to track its productive capacity, not its speculative value. This concludes our technical presentation and our short summary of the claims of our Green Paper. If I had to tell you an animating principle behind this Green Paper, it's this. The challenges we face are not of a material nature. They are challenges of will, of bureaucracy, and of abandoning self-limiting beliefs about the control we have over our own economic and energy destiny. For decades, energy policy has been a matter of clever instruments, of new markets, of new incentives, of new nudges. Look where that line of thinking's got us. It's time to build. It's time to rediscover our will. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, to apply brute force. And as my leader has said, it is to have the confidence in ourselves to work and to say, if brute force isn't working, we're not using enough. Thank you.
Okay, so just before I start my formal presentation, this captures beautifully what Matthew was talking about. There are no wealthy, low energy use countries, not one. So the less energy we use, the guarantee that we will cease to be at the cutting edge of those strong economies is guaranteed. So thank you, Matthew, for your speech. My name's Malyn, and I'm, as Stephen said, I'm the regeneration spokesperson for the SDP. I'm a civil engineer by training. I'm a property developer by inclination. I'm an entrepreneur by temperament, and I'm a very reluctant politician by necessity, because I'm not prepared to accept the country we're leaving to our children. And during my 38-year career, I've been instrumental in developing some of the most iconic developments in London, including Canary Wharf, Paternoster Square, Chiswick Park, Grosvenor Waterside, and the London Bridge Quarter, including the Shard. I've secured more than 10 million square feet of planning consents and built out more than 7 million square feet of developments, including railways, 12 stations on the DLR, apartment complexes, trading floors, factories, and 25,000 refugee places on behalf of the UNHCR during the civil war in Bosnia in 92 to 93. Now, you've heard Matthew describe the causes of our current energy emergency and the hundreds of billions of pounds lost annually in GDP and our plan to fix the grid. I want to highlight two concrete examples of how our energy policy, our current energy policy, is failing both existing businesses and new businesses. So people are gradually waking up to the fact that green jobs have proved to be largely illusionary. Not a single North Sea wind turbine has been manufactured in the UK. A few blades are made by Siemens in Hull. The ships that install the mast come from Netherlands and Sweden, and the cables that run out to sea come from Denmark, Germany, France, Italy, and even Greece. According to the ONS, in 2022, the green economy, defined as low carbon, renewable energy and efficient economy, or LCRE, had a turnover of £69 billion, but 56% of that was for construction and for maintenance of grids. So only 20 billion came from actual green manufacturing jobs, which is smaller than the rubber and plastics industry combined. By contrast, traditional energy intensive industries had a turnover combined of 170 billion out of the total manufacturing capacity turnover of 670 billion. So the energy intensive industries are 8.5 times the size of the much vaunted green sector that's supposed to be rejuvenating British manufacturing. This is a truth no one in government wants to admit. Britain's backbone industries, steel, glass, ceramics, bricks, chemicals, paper, cement and fertilisers, still dwarf the fashionable green sector. These sectors of the economy use huge amounts of electricity and energy as they're part of their production processes. They're strategically important, but also very exposed to high energy costs. They make up 17% of manufacturing jobs, but they generate 25% of manufacturing turnover. And in the UK, they face far higher energy costs and carbon taxes than our key competitors, France, Germany, or the US. We need to fight to keep these industries alive and thriving. If we don't secure cheap, reliable energy for them, we risk hollowing out the very industries our economy is built on. So just one concrete example, pardon the pun. The UK consumes over 90 million tonnes of concrete each year, either in a ready-mixed or precast applications, of which cement is the key ingredient. In 2024, UK cement manufacturers produced 7.3 million tonnes, the lowest since 1950, and roughly half of what we produced here in the UK in 1990. Imports now represent 32% of UK cement because of carbon taxes and expensive gas make local production uncompetitive. These industries are strategic. They underpin construction, infrastructure and food supply. They're economic multipliers because every tonne of cement, steel or fertiliser feeds into the wider economy. They provide high wage, high productivity jobs and they underpin our vital supply chains. When they disappear, we don't just lose factories, we lose skills, we lose communities and we lose national self-sufficiency. Exporting our industrial production to other countries actually increases emissions because then we have to factor in the increased CO2 for transport, not to mention lower environmental standards that often occur abroad. Allowing the public discourse to be dominated by people and organisations with little to no idea of how our industrial society works has brought us to the point of scarcity and the potential collapse of key supply chains. We simply can't carry on like this, or not only will we fail existing industries, but future ones too. Let's now look at data centres, including AI clusters for training and inference. A data centre can cost up to £20 billion to build. Once built, it needs to run 24/7, 365. No exceptions whatsoever, because they have a huge investment to pay back. Build timelines are incredibly tight, as I can attest to, and contractors face brutal penalties for any overruns. This means that 100% of data centre demand is baseload, which eliminates intermittent power as an option. Even a couple of minutes downtime per annum is unacceptable. To date, the hyperscalers have simply assumed that the UK has no issue with electricity, but they're waking up now to the true scale of our foolishness. If they conclude that the anticipated levels of demand increase coming from data centres, which we're estimating at between 1 and 1.5 gigawatts annually for the next 10 years, if that puts excessive strain on the existing generation capacity, they simply won't invest in the UK, and we're out of the AI revolution. There's a network effect here. For any country or area with a data centre economy becomes a logical place for other companies to build their data centres. There's an entire ecology of workers and suppliers with the skills needed to support the industry. So in conclusion, we're approaching that saturation point. The only way to meet industry's need is to build new plants now. The only technology that can be built fast enough to deliver power now with the required reliability is combined cycle gas turbines. The bottom line is that the net zero ambitions need to be paused and many new CCGTs built as soon as possible, or the UK will miss out on the positive network effects and the huge amounts of foreign direct investment will be lost to the country. This is something the current government must face. Change has to start now. The net impact of trillions spent worldwide to date on intermittent technology is to delay global warming by a couple of days. Effectively nothing. Yet it is on this altar that our elites are sacrificing the British economy. We could double down on our spending on current intermittent technology, but double nothing is still nothing. The first rule of civil engineering is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. The great news is we've barely scratched the surface of the potential for nuclear power, with supply chains based in friendly countries like Australia and Canada. A kilogram of uranium contains as much energy as 2.5 million tons of coal, and we're only accessing 1 to 2% of that potential. Nuclear waste can be recycled to produce more fuel, and if you were to power your entire life for 84 years with only a nuclear fission, the total waste wouldn't fill this bottle. With only 10,000 nuclear plants worldwide, we could eliminate all fossil fuels. For context, in the 1970s, the US started building a new reactor every 14 days. So this isn't unprecedented. Speed is a superpower. To deliver this transformation at the scale and pace required, we must act with extraordinary urgency. From the formal design decision at the Quebec conference in 1943 to the completion of 2 Mulberry harbours took 10 months and cost 0.3% of GDP. And it's this level of urgency we need to apply to save our industrial base from further erosion and to start to rebuild our economy. This means mobilising a new generation of top engineering talent. So we will prioritise the training of a cadre of brilliant young engineers drawn from the UK's top universities and the most capable construction firms. To lead this effort, we'll enlist some of the world's most accomplished project managers, and their task will be to train and mentor this elite group who will be highly paid future leaders of British infrastructure in a model inspired by France's École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées. This will not only ensure the success of our 10-year plan, but will establish a lasting foundation of national capability in building infrastructure and large projects for decades ahead. Thank you very much.